Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's devotional. Our thought today is going to come from 1 Timothy chapter 6, and primarily verse 17 through the end of the chapter. But Paul says in verse 6, godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness is the desire to please God, and contentment is the acknowledgement that God has blessed me for the moment, that God has given me what I need for the moment. And it's not about tomorrow or next week or next year, it's about right now. Paul says in Philippians 4 that he had learned in whatever state he was in to be content, to recognize that God had blessed him. There were times that Paul was abased and he abounded. There were times he was full and hungry. There were times he suffered need. And yet, through all of that, he was content. Paul goes on to say in verse 7, we brought nothing into this world. It is certain we can carry nothing out. And of course, that speaks to the physical nature of this world versus the spiritual nature of the soul, and the fact that heaven is going to be a spiritual place and we're not going to take anything with us. Verse 8, having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Those are just the basic, fundamental necessities of life. And then in verse 9, Paul warns about those who desire to be rich. In fact, he says the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and that many brethren had strayed from the faith in their greediness. And as a result, there were many sorrows that came about because of it. But as Paul continues in verse 17, he says, command those who are rich in this present age. Oh, hold on, there's a train going by, inevitably, every time. Alright, starting in verse 17, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold of eternal life. Alright, so what Paul says here in verse 17, command those who are rich in this present age. By contrast to the type of society that Paul's writing to, I think it's safe to say that we're all rich by comparison, given that for the society at that time, it was a struggle just to survive. For us, we have great luxuries, particularly in our society, in our country. It may not be true certainly everywhere, but for most of us, this is going to be us in this category. That we're not to be haughty, we're not to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God. Okay, uncertain riches speaks to the fluid nature of physical things, where things can fade away, things can be stolen, things can disappear, things can rust away. Don't trust in things that are uncertain. What is certain? The living God. And God gives us richly all things to enjoy. And it certainly does speak to not only providing for our necessities, but even things that we can enjoy, recreation and so forth, with under the obviously the command of conduct for God, from God. But verse 18, let them do good, they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share. That speaks to the generous heart of the servants of God. And then in verse 19, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. And I think this is really interesting that in contrast to the idea of like setting up a retirement fund, and Paul's not condemning setting up a retirement fund, but the contrast of setting by in store for the future in the flesh, he's emphasizing storing up for the future in the spirit. And I've heard some preachers relate this as the retirement fund for the Christian, or for the spirit. But the idea is that we store up for ourselves not riches, but instead a good foundation of good works and generosity, that we may lay hold on eternal life. And certainly the importance here is not to trust in the things of the flesh. And I would even expand this beyond just riches. Okay, certainly we can't trust in things to be the way they always have been. And as we can certainly see just from the last 20 or 30 years in our society, things change. And people, the society, in terms of what they're willing to accept or what they're willing to acknowledge or approve of, it changes. Now, human beings never change, they're always the same. But what we get used to or what we expect from our society or from even lifestyle because of our riches or whatnot, sometimes that changes. And economies dip and fall, and inflation hits and things like that. And so don't trust in uncertain riches, but trust in the living God, and make sure that when we have an opportunity, we need to do good with those blessings that we have, especially to the household of God, but that we store up for ourselves a good foundation for the time to come. All right, that's the devotional for you today. Just a emphasizing thought about trusting in God as opposed to uncertain riches, making sure that we remind ourselves that godliness with contentment is great gain. Always seek to please God, and always remember that God has blessed you and has made you sufficient for the moment, and not to worry, as Jesus says in Matthew 6, about tomorrow or next year or next week. Those things will take care of themselves. There's enough problems today. You focus on pleasing God and remembering that God has blessed you. All right. Our next daily devotion will be tomorrow at 6:30. Hope to see you all then. Thank you, everybody.